Welcome to Autocar India. I'm Gavin and this is the new third generation Range Rover Sport. It's just touched down in India. Technically, it's been on sale for about 6 months and bookings have been rolling in, and in fact, deliveries will start from as early as next month. But it's here in a JLR showroom in Mumbai, and I'm going to take you around it and inside it to tell you what it's all about. So let me give you the basic details right away. It comes with two engines, a 3-litre petrol and a 3-litre diesel, both mild hybrid, and it's available in SE, HSE, autobiography and first edition trims. Now the first edition is available for the first year of production only, so if you want to get one of those, get in right away. The prices range from 1.64 crore rupees for the SE diesel going up to 1.84 crore rupees for the first edition diesel. And you might notice that those prices are still considerably lower than the full-size flagship Range Rover, which start at over 2 crore rupees. Now, if you like what you see here and can't wait to see the full review on Indian roads of this Range Rover Sport, I hope you're subscribed to the Autocar India channel, that you've liked this video and shared it with your friends, and we'll post that review very, very soon. Now, with the previous generation of the Range Rover Sport, its positioning was a little bit cloudy with relation to the full-size Range Rover, and that's because not only did it share a lot of mechanicals, but also it shared the way it looked with that car, and that's not the case anymore with this third generation model. It looks entirely different from the big Range Rover. So it's not just the price gap that differs from that car, but the way it looks as well, and it starts right here at the front. The headlights are a whole lot slimmer, but they are the full digital lighting system which can even project stuff onto the road in front of you. The grille is slimmer too, and yes, there are some Range Rover Sport signatures like down here where the bumper is altogether more sporty. You'll notice more of the changes as you go over to the side, starting with the wheels. Yes, they are 22-inch size, but the style is a lot sportier than on the flagship Range Rover. In fact, it's quite interesting that 22 inches are now the recommended size. We used to marvel at 20 inches before, but the car has grown so much bigger now that 22 is the medium size. You can get 23, but JLR doesn't recommend that for our roads for obvious reasons. Other changes are the new Range Rover Sport signature, which is much smaller and sportier. In the big Range Rover, you get the full vertical slats, you might remember that, but here it's just this. Things that are retained are the minimalist design, where the pillars sort of blend into the bodywork over here, so there's no sill, so to speak. It looks very smooth and very flush. And that continues over to the back, where you get this wraparound effect. Now it's one piece of glass that just sort of blends into the back, and it all looks very clean, very minimalist, and that's what they like. But the real difference is over at the back. Now you can really tell this is a Sport by looking at the back. For one, the rear glass is far more great, and this is a very, very clean rear end. Now the Range Rover, the new one, comes with those signature vertical hidden tail lamps, but not this. No, this is a nice horizontal bar, big Range Rover in the center, and the accents in the tail lamps are entirely different. The rear looks a whole lot more compact visually than the big Range Rover, and there are very subtle curves, and though it looks quite minimalist, that you can only see up close and in person. And seeing the car now, I can tell you it really makes a huge difference. And of course, down here, a small diffuser area, but crucially big exhaust tips that are very much real. Another thing worth noting is the difference in the kind of boot that this offers. Yes, it is an SUV, it has a hatchback boot that lifts up, but in the big Range Rover, you do get this sort of picnic table effect that folds down. It's a split tailgate. You don't get that here. This is a very large boot, and there will be for India a full-size spare wheel, although this car doesn't have it. It will be housed underneath there, still giving you loads of space. And if you want, of course, you can split fold the rear seats. That's powered. And you can even lower the air suspension for easier loading. Now, this may be a Sport, but it's still a Range Rover. So one thing it absolutely had to have was air suspension. In fact, it's mechanically identical to the flagship Range Rover, and that means up to 281 millimeters of ground clearance and up to 900 millimeters of water wading depth. So yeah, all the off-road ability of the full-size Range Rover has remained intact, but there is a slight difference in the way it's tuned. This suspension is tuned for sportier handling. So if you put it in dynamic mode and you really go for it, it will react faster than the big Range Rover, which is tuned more for luxury. Similarly, the torque vectoring and all that kind of driven stuff is much more aggressive in this car than it is in the full-size Range Rovers. So while it's managed to pull in a lot from the big Range Rover, they've also managed to differentiate it sufficiently too. And there's more of that on the inside. Now here on the inside is where things get really interesting in my opinion, because while they've tried to pull in a lot of stuff from the luxurious new Range Rover, they have to also keep things in check so it's not too similar to that. Well, it starts with the driving position and the layout of the dashboard. You're sat a little bit lower in this car for that sporty feel, and the dashboard is raked back a little bit. The whole design is altogether more sporty. It's still not quite as sporty as some rivals which are truly like being in a sedan. But yeah, you get that Range Rover feel, the commanding driving position, but it's just that little bit lower down. The seats are also sportier with much greater side bolstering than in the big Range Rover. Returning is also tech like the 13-inch touchscreen, curved Pivi Pro, the latest version of that. This screen too, a really crisp, high-resolution one compared to the previous cars. Over here, you get a much more angled back layout for the center console. A lot of piano black on this car, but a lot of the functionality is retained, like these really cool push and pull contextual AC knobs that have become a signature of Range Rovers in the last few years. It is of course loaded with features, and even if you choose a lower variant, you can spec it up individually from the options list. But let's take a look at some of those features now. Now, apart from just the design and the layout of this interior, there's also the kind of trim that you can choose that's slightly different. In the big Range Rover, you can select sort of more luxurious trims, more wood options, all that kind of stuff, whereas over here, you're limited to a slightly smaller palette. But there are still a lot of things to choose from. For instance, you can choose two kinds of leather, Windsor leather, semi-aniline leather, but you can also choose a no leather option, which is entirely vegan. There's also this very nice dark chrome effect all over the cabin that really feels effective and rich. And there is this very luxurious feeling fabric cover for the speakers. Now, Range Rover thinks putting steel covers on your speakers is a bit ostentatious, so they've hidden them away under this fabric trim, and I think that looks really, really cool. It's the back seat that really separates this Sport from the flagship Range Rover, however. Now, it's not just the aluminium-intensive MLA Flex architecture that this car shares with the big Range Rover, but this car actually shares its exact wheelbase with the standard wheelbase Range Rover. So again, they've had to do a few things to keep it different from that car. And this car is very much focused on the driver's seat, so the back seat takes a bit of a back seat, if you will, to that seat over there. And as such, it's not quite as plush as the big Range Rover, but they have still made it very, very comfortable for the chauffeur driven, of which there should be quite a few in India. For instance, this is still very much a bench seat and not a split two-seat layout that you can have in the big Range Rover, but they've made it a little bit more comfortable for passengers by putting in 37 degrees of recline, which is quite a bit. It's also a very comfortable seat, very well cushioned, nice and soft, not too firm. And yeah, each individual passenger on the left and right, I think even the middle passenger, apart from the slight hump in the floor, wouldn't be too uncomfortable here. You don't get the powered armrest like you do in the other Range Rover, but it's still a big chunky one, gives you nice support, set at the right height. And there's a lot to like back here. Big panoramic sunroof, these nice, very classy looking grab handles up here, and for the first time in a Range Rover Sport, you get AC vents up here too, like in the big Range Rover. The other thing that's new for this car are rear sun blinds, but they're manual, and I think at this price people would have liked powered ones, wouldn't they? I think the most impressive thing from the big Range Rover is that it took a huge step up in quality compared to the previous generation, and that they haven't really compromised on that here. Everything inside is absolutely top-notch quality. The fit and finish is a huge step up from the previous Range Rover Sport, and nice touches like the fabric speaker covers are really, really good. You do find traces of old generation stuff like this lock unlock button that looks curiously not fitting with the rest, but everything else looks and feels very, very upmarket, as it should at this price. As you might imagine, you won't be wanting for space in the back of a car like this. Yes, it is the Sport, and yes, its roofline is a little bit lower than the big Range Rovers, but clearly loads of headroom still available. And even when it comes to knee room, plenty more thanks to the longer wheelbase compared to the previous Range Rover Sport. With just 2 engines and 4 trims, making for a total of only 5 variants, the Sport's model range is nice and compact. Unlike the flagship Range Rover, which has an absurd 37 variants on offer in India. Combine this with a vast array of customization and you should still be able to get precisely the spec you want. Moreover, JLR says customization won't increase the waiting period, which currently stands at 12 to 15 months. With the flagship model having moved up in price, it gives the Range Rover Sport a bit more room to breathe and establish an identity of its own. It's still an expensive proposition, but with far more tech and a higher quality cabin, it feels a bit more earned this time around. But does this new model do justice to the word Sport in its name? For that, you'll just have to stay tuned for our review on Indian roads.